Explorer, and tonight we will continue our reading in Last Days by Adam Neville. This is one of his many novels, and he has a book out called Ritual that Netflix decided to use for their film. So I hope you all have been enjoying this book. Please like and comment down below. Please also, to help my channel out, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any videos coming up. Um, we have, so starting in May, whenever we get this book done, if we finish it before May, great. If not, in May, I have, in honor of Star Wars, I have a Star Wars book. And it makes sense because it's May the 4th, May the 5th, May the 6th. I consider it Star Wars month, and the book is gonna be the whole month. Sorry, I had to think about that for a minute, but I'm not gonna say which book it is. There are lots of books, so you can discuss it, narrow it down to figure out which book that one might be. But I hope you all are enjoying Last Days. I'm personally enjoying it myself. It has gotten it's getting very, it's getting a bit more intense. Like some of the stuff is starting to slow down a bit. Um, I am very curious to see what's going to happen at the end of this book. It's definitely it has a nice build up so far. I'd say we're about halfway done. So I'm hoping all the exciting stuff is coming up. But so far, not too bad. I'd like to hear what you all think of this book. You can find this at Barnes and Noble. Just letting you know it's out there. So without further ado, let's continue reading Last Days. Chapter 18. Somewhere over California, Flight AA-102, June 21st, 2011, 2 a.m. In the window seat beside him, Dan snored. He's fallen asleep minutes after takeoff. At the same time, Kyle had fired up his laptop to begin assembling a rough cut of the footage they'd shot in Phoenix in the sit-down interview with Detective Sweeney. 3 shoots in 3 days, and Kyle hadn't slept more than 2 hours the previous night. They were due to land in Seattle at 5 a.m. and intended to drive straight to Martha Lake's house from the airport. The plane journey to Seattle being their only chance for any rest now until the U.S. schedule was in the can, sometime early the following afternoon. But sleep was the last thing Kyle would allow himself, even on a plane. It now felt plausible that he would never sleep again without dreaming of something that might get him sectioned. He arranged his laptop and the Martha Lake notes on the fold-down tray, fought with the rucksack, fought with his rucksack until he found Levine's Last Days. Thought hard again on his questions in light of what he had learned from Aguilar and the 2 cops. Leafed through Levine's book and arrived at the plate section in which the journalist had favored the most famous portrait of Martha Lake, the Seattle PD mugshot after she'd been arrested for shoplifting in 1971, 1 year before her association with the cult. Martha Lake had been the prettiest of all the Temple of the Last Days girls that Kyle had seen pictures of. Amish wholesome and broad of face, arresting brown eyes, voluptuous lips, and perfect American teeth. Long hazel hair parted down the center and tied in bunches either side of the guileless face, a dusting of freckles across the a dusting of freckles across a cartoon character's upturned nose. There were other pictures of Lake as a younger woman that Kyle had saved to file from a Google Images search. Most of the photographs online had been uploaded onto cult obsessed blogs run by amateur enthusiasts. These featured Lake at 23, during her return to Arizona under police escort to give a statement, and to eventually testify against Brother Belial. That was the intention behind her extradition from Canada, though her participation at trial was never required. In the photographs shot at Lake as Lake walked through Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport beside her lawyer, Marty Trusconi, and surrounded by a four-man plainclothes police escort. She had worn a check pinafore over a high-necked blouse, a disarming Little House on the Prairie ensemble. Her eyes were hidden by big sunglasses, her hair covered by a wide-brimmed floppy hat. Diane Keaton, chick from the chin up. As the last investigation grew on, there were pictures of her leaving the police station in Phoenix, wearing tight leather knee boots and a dress coat, a subtle smile at the corners of her mouth and shining within her big eyes. There was another of her in strappy high-heeled sandals, a lilac-colored suit, and sheer pantyhose on long legs that returned to press photographers' flash to illuminate the fantasies of the average American male. She'd not long crawled out of she'd not long crawled out with a baby on her back, but Kyle was tempted to believe she enjoyed the attention by that stage of the investigation. Was off the hook. Martha was off the hook. Martha had escaped. Star Witness, Fox, Killer Scarlet, Heroic Mother, depending on which tabloid was read back then by people thirsty for gore and desperate for sensation. The media's obsession with Martha Lake had been erotic in its intensity and agape in its incredulity that such a beautiful young girl next door could have been mixed up in all that. A terrible book was ghostwritten for her in 1976 called A Mother's Tears, A Child's Cry, which she later denounced as total fiction. Kyle had tracked down an old paperback from an eBay seller. After reading Levine's book, he merely skimmed through A Mother's Tears and its hyperbole-riddled fixation with the sexual antics of the cult. There was nothing about the bloody climax of Sister Catherine's Paradise, because Lake had not been at the mine in July 1975, and there was little information about the group's hierarchy or rituals because Lake had probably not been consulted when the book was written. A movie made for TV based on the book called Bloody Martha, which credited her as a producer, was a take the money and run collaboration if ever he'd seen one. The film still hadn't even made it on DVD, he'd checked. But the forced couplings, the drug frenzies in Eden, the unknown father, her intimate proximity to a pack of crazy-faced satanic killers at an abandoned copper mine, all trailed behind her like a comet's tail, an imaginary force that lifted her out of the frame of the press photos. For nearly 2 years, she danced with the devil and opened wide to eat from his table out in the moon-like Sonoran desert. She had a mystique, beauty, and enigma that must have made Sister Catherine's ashes whirl like a dust devil within her municipal grave. Catherine went down in popular history as a fat frump, an obese Countess Bathory, a manipulative psycho, while while Martha Lake and the recently deceased raven-haired beauty, Bridget Clover, came out of that mind fantasized about like Playboy centerfolds and revered as feminist anti-heroes. Film critics still hailed them as the precursors to the hard-body scream queens that populate trashy horror slashers. They had the requisite beauty and a proximity to genuine evil, if not a potential participation in it, to become icons. Until 1981, when the wild-eyed and feral creature that Martha became saw her celebrity dwindle onto the lesser pages, revealing tawdry stories of substance addiction, alleged promiscuity, credit card fraud, and the familiar saga of a child being taken into care of the court. The money was gone, the looks were going, and then she vanished for 30 years until Tenacious Max found her 3 months prior to their interview for the film. And he was actually going to meet Martha Lake in a few hours. Where you been all my life, Martha? Dan turned in his seat with a groan. That is the end of chapter 18. And now let's go ahead and read chapter 19 because this next chapter is there's a lot in this chapter and we've got plenty of time to read it. So let's go ahead and start the chapter, shall we? Chapter 19, Seattle, June 22nd, 2011 at 10 a.m. The woman who answered the door to Kyle and Dan was barely recognizable as the Martha Lake circa 75 or even 81. Within a wooden door frame that looked like it suffered from subhor, 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 suborhoic dermatitis. Martha Lake was famine thin under a shapeless cardigan and sweatpants. A stringy neck stretched to a face collapsed with so much regret, disappointment, sorrow, and hopelessness. It carried the misery sentence of another decade more than any woman of 58 years would wish to serve. The broad bone structure was still in evidence beneath the deeply lined skin that hung from it. Downturned and haggard, her mouth hadn't released much laughter since 1977, when she was flown from one top of the town party to another. The big passionate lips had vanished into the grooves around her mouth and scoring her chin. That proud and secret smile from news footage of 75 was now a muzzle. Pulled tight into a ponytail, her hair was white strung with gunmetal gray. But the eyes were classic Martha Lake, handsome, intelligent, alert, timeless. Kyle had stared into them for a long time while he researched her online. But now they were staring back at him. He found himself different and nervous, as if overwhelmed by an authority he'd hitherto underestimated, or as if suddenly confronted by a girl he hadn't realized he'd been stalking. She caught his reaction, seemed to like it, smiled without moving her mouth. Behind her, a malodor of cheap cigarettes and unkempt living spaces issued from the murk of her home. Nice to see I can still turn heads. Her laugh was a wet catarrh grumble. Her teeth were mostly brown. Come on in, kids. She peered over their heads, up and down the street quickly, then stood aside on grubby slippered feet. The world inside Martha Lake's rented Volkswagen Volt Victorian house, with its pointed gables, weathered spindles, and gingerbread details over the peeling porch sunk into an overgrown yard, was missing some essential colors. Silver had gone from the places where the thin light seeped. Warmer tones of the reds had been drained from the hardwood floor and banisters. Anything once white only emitted a gray or dull brown spectrum. Door frames and skirting boards were chipped and scuffed. Ancient wallpaper of a wintry green stifled visibility to eye level. Before plaster painted the tone of took artificial limbs took over and grew sickly to the murky ceiling and its cracked plaster moldings. The building that opened around Kyle was vast and gave the impression not so much of vacancy, but of its abandonment in another time. The silence and stillness slowed Kyle's mind, but never put it at ease. In fact, the atmosphere immediately turned his spirits downwards. Sunlight failed to move much further than the glass it came in through, and left vague blue stripes across the ceiling. In the hallway, Martha led them along to the kitchen. Spend my time in here. In the kitchen, pale blinds were half drawn behind grubby net curtains, about which a dwindling brown light hovered. The swept, the swept but scratched lino on the floor of the kitchen was patterned with daisies, but their two-dimensional floral beaming did nothing to enliven the room. Wooden wall cabinets, painted yellow, were now faded to a soiled vanilla. Clear plastic door handles were cut like jewels. Kyle's Nan had similar. Same for the big enamel sink. The wooden table with four simple chairs, the blue and white check tablecloth. Beside it, an ancient-looking metal stove. Martha's glasses and mugs and plates were stacked neatly, but tidiness would never make the kitchen look homely. One of those rooms in one of those houses that made him feel like an intruder within, and a witness too, the meagerness and poverty of the aged. He came to this dreadful place exhausted, but the room made him feel so forlorn his movements diminished to a shuffle. But it was a good location for the interview. A Hollywood art director couldn't have designed better. It was a further representation of Martha's decline, of what became of the survivors, another of those places where the bloody memories of the cult's vertical ascent into chaos were stored. In the dim room, Martha's face glowed faintly like unsalted butter. The table before her chair was covered in an assortment of medication in blister packs, beside a bottle of Four Roses bourbon. You what? You want? She said, when she saw Kyle spy the whiskey before looking away. Kyle nearly said, "Not this early," but shook his head instead. "No thanks." Coffee in the pot? Fresh made. Dan? No ta. Dan began setting up the lights and unpacking the sound equipment, content to be the silent member of the crew, not so much indifferent as happily irrelevant to the talent. Kyle poured himself a cup and one for Martha. He was too on edge to ask her where the sugar was. He'd winced it He'd wince it down black and bitter. Kyle also knew from Max's notes that Martha had three children by three different men, and the only father that remained a mystery was the father of her eldest son, who was conceived at the copper mine in 1973. The other fathers and all of the children appeared long gone. He wondered whether one of the dim rooms outside the kitchen held their images inside frames. Big place for one person. Martha gave Kyle a knowing smile. Takes longer to fill. He wasn't sure what she meant. Dan did a light meter reading behind Martha's head, and looked really uneasy as he did so. One more shoot, mate. Last one. The last one of the last days. Martha took a deep draw on her cigarette. It's the third place I rented this year. Gotta keep moving. Past keeps catching up. The press? Martha smiled her brown smile and stubbed out the cigarette, took another from the packet on the table, lit up. You don't know nothing, do you? She shook her head and pulled a long draught of thick smoke into her lungs. Its passage downwards sounded like it rasped through a series of small holes inside her chest. Kyle smiled and hoped to disarm what he intuited as mockery. I'm hoping you might change that, he said. We've interviewed the police who worked the case, and the son of the man who once owned the ranch nearby. He did. He did? Mr. Aguilar? Yes. Through a veil of cigarette smoke, Martha's eyes narrowed. How'd he go? Not sure. His son never said. God rest his soul. He's the only reason I'm sitting here now. Kyle nodded. His son spoke highly of him. Back then, police didn't bother groups like we had, unless you gave them pretty good cause. Different now. But out at the mine, there was no one to help us right till the end we knew was coming. Except for Mr. Aguilar. He tried to help Prissy too. Martha stopped talking and shook her head. Sister Priscilla? Martha snorted. What you know about Pris? What you know about Prissy? Not much, just that Mr. Aguilar sheltered her after she ran. But then she just gave herself up to the temple. Martha nodded. Fool. But I can't blame her. Kyle looked at Dan to see how close he was to readiness. Why? She took she went back for her baby boy. Couldn't get no further than that ranch. Broken heart brought her back to the mine, but she should have kept going and gone straight to the police. She suddenly clapped her hands, startling Kyle and Dan. Ha! Shoulda, coulda. Story of my life. She threw her head back and cackled until a wet cough crackled her entire body. Dan's eyes went wide. Kyle went for water. Martha wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of her cardigan and wheezed like she was sucking air into her lungs through a wet cheesecloth. She nodded her appreciation for Kyle's assistance with the sweater, for the hand on her shoulder. When her breathing returned to a semblance of normality, Dan said, Ready when you are, boss. From behind. Ugh. Ooh, whoa, almost fell back there. Okay. Where was I? From behind the tripod mounted from behind the tripod mounted camera. They'd shoot this naturally because Kyle wanted to be what it was, an anxious woman with lined skin, smoking in a dismal kitchen, and talking about the imprisonment and murder of her friends. A time in her life she'd never escaped. This was her last chance to do something, and she wanted to take it, like it was a statement, if not a will. That's how she made it feel. Martha, you are the only living survivor of the Temple of the Last Days who was an adult member in its final days in the Sonoran Desert. The spring and summer of 1975. We'll never know, but the children who survived the last days were probably too young at the time of their rescue to remember much about the cult, and the death by suicide of Bridget Clover earlier this year makes you the only known living memory of the temple in its final incarnation. Martha nodded her head and raised her jaw with what looked like stubborn pride. Got that right. Besides the cigarettes and whiskey, Kyle wondered if anything else could give her satisfaction at this point in her life. So would you begin by telling us a little about how you came to be a member of the temple? She told them a lot more than a little. Like Brother Gabriel and Sister Isis before her, Kyle assumed from Martha Lake's narration that she didn't get out much. She also displayed the same unnerving eccentric- eccentricity that incubates in a lengthy isolation. He wondered if they had all been fundamentally damaged before their time in the cult, or whether the association made each made each of them irretrievably alien in the ordinary worlds they were later tried to inhabit. Susan and Gabriel had become gregarious enough in the company of him and Dan, but both exhibited the signs of a consistent failure to make a lasting contact with others in any way meaningful enough to renew a membership in society. They were all misfits and outcasts, and they made him feel his time with them had to be kept short, as if they were contagious. Only Max appeared to have flourished post Catherine, but then he was hardly normal either. Martha's story of the early days would have to be cut tight to a voiceover. If anything, it was typical enough to be a cliche. A girl from a poor home with a violent and mostly absent father and an alcoholic mother. A girl who dropped out of high school and ran away to San Francisco. Followed that up by experimenting with drugs and communal living in the euphoria of the 60s youth revolution. Drifted down to LA with some drug dealers and hooked up with enigmatic last temple types wearing their robes on Santa Monica Boulevard, with their intense eyes and their talk of the God in you and salvation and paradise. They were the new family she had been looking for, an inclusion with significance. She she shared the common belief of the disaffected in a prophesied Armageddon, and the belief in having been chosen to survive it. The therapeutic power of self-examination and self-interpretation in a poor backward life that had known none until that point, twinned with the powerful mind-bending experiences of hallucinogenic drugs, gobbled down like M&Ms, had a transforming impact upon her, and it all groomed her for the adventure of the desert retreat. And then it was too late to get out because there was nothing to go back to, not even a planet she recognized through eyes that were too old and too warped by 1975. The worst thing that could have happened to her then was celebrity. Martha, many of the people who joined the temple the last days from 1974 to 1975 never actually saw Sister Catherine, let alone met her, but in the early stages of the last days in LA in 1972, and the first year you were all based at the copper mine in 1973, when Sister Catherine made the occasional appearance. You did meet her. I got that right. I've I've read your interviews with I Irving Levine, but I wonder get has if time has given you any more insights into her. Martha pointed her cigarette at Kyle. Let me tell you something. People think Irvine's book is trash, but he made it up. She shook her head, sucked hard on the filter, and spoke through the smoke with force. He didn't. Most things I told him, and Bridget told him, he put down just like we told it, but it reads as so crazy people can't accept it. And a lot of I told him he never used, because it was even crazier. Can you give us some examples? Martha gave Kyle a sly smile. We'll get there, but like I told Max, you got to have context, or it don't make any sense. Of course. All you movie people are the same. She smiled again. Like I was saying, Irvine was a crime man. Reporter, reporter, courts, police stuff. He was after the juice on the murders, drugs, imprisonment, rape. Trash like that. The stuff that would end up in court. He wanted everyone to read his book. That like that one on Charlie Manson that was so big. So some of what I told him, Irvine Irvine never used. Didn't believe it. It didn't believe it is why. Thought it was stuff we imagined because we were hopped up on drugs the whole time. Strange how that's the stuff people want to hear about now. People? Martha grinned her yellow grin. That's why you want to cut to the chase, ain't it? Max already told me that's all he's after anyways. Them other things. Kyle bit down on the gush of anger that came up from his stomach like reflux. Not for the first time he wondered who was really directing the film. He cleared out his throat. So the two things are inseparable. Catherine's pathology and the stranger aspects of the last day's story. Martha smiled. Smart boy, she chuckled, a moist rattle in her throat. Max been stepping on your toes. I can see that. He seems the type that would. More money than sense, you ask me. But that's what I said to Max. And you can't have one without the other. Catherine was behind it all, even when she wasn't there. She was there. If you know what I mean, she knew everything because we told her everything, one way or another. We were all her spies at one time, and everything we said when she weren't around, the seven would whisper back to her. Martha raised an eyebrow, started to play with her lighter. What time has what time has told me is that we were all part of the same setup from the get-go, back in LA. Oh yeah, she had plans way back then. Before maybe, before maybe, wouldn't surprise me none. Got all us fools out there in that desert and trained us like dogs. But for what? It was a need to know thing. I don't think she ever showed her real hand until right at the end. Which, thank the Lord, I wasn't around to see. But we were always being kept for something else. No doubt in my mind. The same thing Max is so keen on. Kyle nodded with relief, as much as an acknowledgement of her ideas, because she wouldn't need coaxing. Maybe the interview was a nostalgic reminder of those dizzy days of magazine features and interviews on 60 Minutes. Other commentators on the cult emphasized Sister Catherine's amassing of material wealth, of exploiting her followers like slaves. She got millions from Sister Urania, the English lady, but having what we owned was another way of owning us, of cutting us off. She just used it to separate us from everything that we were, who we had been. She took our freedom next. Anything we had of value, she took it. Kind of stripped us clean. Took our dignity too, till the only thing left to take from us was our children and our lives. Martha stopped herself and withdrew for a moment. The last comment a painful reminder of something Kyle wanted to hear. Do you think there was any value in Catherine's ideology? Not a single thing. At that all that freeing of our souls from the yoke of guilt and repression was trash. Oh, everything was wild to start with. It was pretty cool in LA, and when we got to the desert for a while, I never felt so free. Never had so many friends. Good friends. Martha shook her head, removed another cigarette from The packet of Salem lights on the table lit up, squinted as she drew hard on the cigarette. But she had her needs, was just biding her time. Needs? What kind of needs? Martha stared at the table in silence again, bit her bottom lip. When she looked up at Kyle, the tough talking broad had retreated. She showed him a face that had been swiftly transformed by pain. Her hard voice softened, lowered. Everyone has needs. Love, approval, whatever we got 'em all. We got all got 'em. But her needs were different. I don't think she could stop herself. She was like a shark. She wanted blood in the water all the time. She liked the sound. She liked to wound. She liked to wound. She liked to cause pain any way she could. Humiliation, guilt, exclusion, whatever she could use on a person, or from a fear of those things. But not even that was enough. The head games. It was just practice, preparation. I read the I read one book on psychos that said she was evolving at that time when he when we was in LA and at the time of and at the mine in the early days when she used to chair them sessions. She was becoming something else the whole time, and believe I truly believe she was before it got physical. Martha played with her lighter, pawed a pack, packet of medication, swiveled the ashtray. Physical. Martha stared hard at Kyle. Rape? Sodomy? He shrugged. Sure. He had she had us beaten too. There was another long pause. Martha looked at the window. Like it was an escape route that had been missed. Oh, she liked all that right. She liked that all right. Liked us to beg for forgiveness. I think it was the begging that got her off when she was around. And whenever the seven reported to her what we were supposed to have done wrong was irrelevant. The stuff we said in the sessions we made up just to have something to say. But it was the submission that excited her. Us all scared of her and telling her everything in that trashy old shack she called the temple. I seen it in her eyes. Hard gray eyes. That crazy person. Martha stopped talking. Her hands were shaking. A cigarette was clumsily stubbed out. Another was lit. The bourbon was fish-eyed. They burned more brightly for sure when someone was crying or screaming or just lying down all broken and silent on their own. Everything was a weapon to her. The sun, sh- she would put you out under. The cold at night she would leave you in. The chain of command, our children, wherever she could use. Martha pulled hard on the cigarette. The end of it burned so fiercely it seemed to light up the dismal kitchen for one incandescent moment. Everyone was afraid. That's how we was controlled. Fear. No one stayed her favorite for long. Yet when she smiled at you, or when whoever was her favorite among the seven gave you a kind word, He would do anything at all to stay chosen. What made her take what made her take charge, Martha? Can you identify anything specifically that made her behave so badly? Made her treat you so terribly? Martha nodded, smiled and smiled knowingly. Sure can. She turned when people started leaving. She couldn't take that, like it was some kind of personal rejection. In 73 people was in 73 people were coming and going all the time. By 74 people were mostly going. When she and the 7 were getting tougher, when the paranoia got real bad, and us all wasting our time trying to sell that book in Yuma. It was like the party was over and no one wanted to hang around and clear up the mess. But she was clever. She looked she'd hooked enough of us by then. It's hard for people to accept that you never left while you still had free will, particularly when the situation was so distressing. Martha snorted. Once you've given up everything, you had to make it work, because there was nothing else for you, nowhere to go, and you were scared of her. But you were kind of scared of losing her too. Crazy scared all the time. Did you also do things out there that you regret? Martha nodded her head. Plenty. Can you tell us about you were what you were complicit in? Martha smiled. I can tell you things we'd done that no one else admitted. She shrugged. Can tell you how we all accused each other of things. Pretended we had these secret thoughts. Telepathy. Ha! We denounced each other. Could happen to you at any time. You had to go along with it. We all did. It's how we got each other beaten. I even told lies on Prissy and Bridget. Watched Belial whip the trash out of them. They squealed on me and watched me get beat too. She placed her hands on the table, pushed her chair back with a loud squeal that made Dan flinch behind the camera. She stood up, turned around, and raised her cardigan and t-shirt as if she were about to suddenly go topless, but never raised her clothing above the level of her prominent scapula. You want that in your film? Kyle heard himself swallow. He nodded at Dan. Martha, Mark of Brother Belial. Wow. Dan filmed the ghostly white scar tissue that crisscrossed her back. I was pregnant with my boy when he done that. Kyle's head emptied. He felt dizzy and horribly vulnerable, and actually afraid, though he wasn't sure of what. It was it was like one of those situations when his overconfidence was punished with a salutary reminder of what he was really up against. Got 24 pages left? Yes, 24 pages are left. Sorry, 22 pages are left. Martha lowered her Martha lowered her clothes, reordered them, sat down and uncapped the bottle of bourbon, glugged it into a tooth glass, took another cigarette from the packet. We all took our part in folks getting whooped or getting them excluded for trash I can't even recall now. Forced other girls to give up their babies to the temple, like they forced me to. Didn't interfere when someone got raped. like when them poor boys, brother Ariel and brother Adonis, was raped by the seven, to teach them a lesson for pride. Kyle winced. Levine had written about the male rape at the mine, which had become a favorite method of control that Belial and Moloch inflicted on two younger men who were still members of the Last Days in 1975. Brothers Ariel and Adonis. And on the journey over to America, Kyle had finished reading Tim Reiterman's Raven, the definitive biography of Reverend Jim Jones and his People's Temple. In Guyana, Jones had sodomized his most devoted, trusted, and respected male followers. He had indulged his emotional need to inflict pain and humiliation on those heterosexual uh, men closest to him, to reduce any man he perceived as competition to his authority. According to Susan White, aka Sister Isis, Catherine had begun a similar manipulation in London, which enforced celibacy, then enforced unions. Way back then, she must have been encouraged by the divisive and disarming effects of such methods upon her followers. And we never spoke up when we went with the guns when they went from Ariel after Ariel and Adonis. Oh, we heard talk later. We heard Belial joking that Adonis, ah, Adonis hated himself at the end. How they chopped that boy up and buried him deep. You said when they went out with guns. Who were they? The seven. Who else? Belial was appointed chastiser, and we were all threatened with being buried alive if we ran or talked to the FBI. That was the punishment to for apostates, being buried alive. Maybe the boys was killed that way. I didn't think so. I don't think so. Belial liked knives, then rifles. But those boys got buried one way or another, live or dead, when he was through with his chastising. Why were Ariel and Adonis murdered? You mentioned pride. Martha shrugged. That's what that's what they said those two was always guilty of. But it weren't that. Them boys were smart, college educated, both of them. They did their best to put up with the discipline, but they started to question things. Ariel could tuck the hind legs of Belial and he hated it. Things got bad for Ariel, and then Adonis too when he stuck up for his friend. When they ran, they were the first to get done as apostates. When Ariel and Adonis ran, while we was still building that fence, I heard Belial tell brother Moloch and Baal to kill them. He said, "You killed those crudes." Baal and Moloch tracked tracked them with the dogs, came back grinning from ear to ear. Belial threw a party afterwards. Martha stretched her sinewy neck up and out of her collar to smile, though not pleasantly. I'm in purgatory. Not huh. Not in Hades yet, but I will be soon, for the part I played. You can take that to the bank. She knocked back the entire 2 inches of fresh whiskey in her glass. Kyle couldn't think of anything to say. He looked at pages of the script on his side of the table, but his flicking eyes couldn't read the type. Unexplained phenomena, hauntings, they were his thing, not murder. Murder, really? Martha gasped and successfully suppressed a coughing fit. Wiped her eyes. Slowly wiped her eyes. Where was I? Oh, there we are. You know what they always told us, huh? They told us that we were forgiven, that our actions were blessed. Catherine told us we were perfect. We had transcended. We believed her. Had to. What we what we was doing was too awful to think about. All we needed on this earth were her blessings. That power was given to her by others, by friends, old friends. That's what she and the seven always said. Martha broke off and looked up at the ceiling. She smiled her sinister smile again. Friends none of us needed, that's for sure. Kyle recalled what Detective Sweeney had said about Belial looking at the ceiling of the interview room when he mentioned old friends. His thoughts tripped over one another, his skin chilled, his neck prickled. He looked across at Dan, who hadn't broken his gaze from the viewfinder, but his face was pallid, twitchy. Martha returned her attention to the table, poured herself another generous measure of whiskey. And you know what? We was punished if we showed any guilt for what we did to each other. So you learn to not show it. Ha! But if she was so clever, if she could see us inside. However come she never knew me and Bridget were going to run that night. That night? How about that? Kyle cleared his throat. Not sure who that was that Martha referred to. You're absolutely certain Sister Catherine ordered the killings? Sure. The seven. Oof, you can do it. The seven never done a thing without her say so first. And in 75, it all went to Hades. The seven was doing things with people they took away from the group. We didn't know what, but it was something to do with the friends. Some people came back for the street crazy. Couldn't speak or tell us what went down out there, like Brother Ariel and Brother Adonis. Just before they ran they also seen something out there in the desert. Was showed something real bad by the seven. They'd been raped, sure enough, but it was something else that finally sent them boys sent them boys running for their lives. Then a couple of girls who went out with the seven never come back at all. It's like we was all begging tried out for something. Something? Can you elaborate on what Sister Catherine's aims were? Martha shrugged. but looked frightened. Hard to know. She broke us all, and them kids made us weak, so she could mess with our heads. We was prisoners, isolated, and people was saying some real crazy things in 75. They was losing their minds. Hard to to say, hard to say what was what. Some was saying they was getting taken out of themselves when they was sleeping and finding it hard to get back. We didn't know what was real and what was a bad trip. But it was all for something. Catherine was plotting something we had to say. We had no saying, and would have said no to. So she kept exactly what was uh, uh Catherine's plotting something. Uh Something. We had no way in and would have said no to, but she kept exaltedly. What if when it was when it was to her belief? I'm sure I ain't sure even the seven really knew what it was all for. Whatever the come on. Was plotting something. We had no say in it to say no say in and would have said no to. So she kept exactly what what it was to herself. I ain't sure even the seven really knew what it was all for. Whatever she had in mind out there in the desert. But when they started talking, folks out at night, it felt like the end for all us all was pretty close. Guess I was right about that. Kyle swallowed and took a deep breath, getting taken out of themselves at night. Sleep. Did you? Martha looked at Martha looked at Kyle intensely and in silence, as if suddenly wary or even suspicious of him. When she lowered her eyes to the table, she nodded. Few times I told myself it was the LSD that made me feel like I was inside something else. Some other thing that weren't right. Like I had been like I had been pulled out of my own skin. Kyle forced himself to focus on the script, looked down at his papers and tried to stop his jaw from trembling. Saw the slides of the missing temple followers' faces. The individuals the police looked for after Martha and Bridget gave their statements back in 1975. It would be more poignant if Martha could name them for the film. He cleared his throat. You always claimed some of your friends were murdered. Who else besides Adonis and Ariel, who never came back? Sister Urania, who wouldn't hear who wouldn't hear a thing, a bad word said against Catherine. Not ever. She came from France, same as Sister Hannah. They were older, nice girls, English. Urania was the one I told you gave up a big interferent inheritance to the temple. Millions, every penny. Used to think on that when I saw her knee deep in a dumpster in Yuma, fetching garbage out to feed her child. Same as Hannah, she would never have run. She was in it to the last drop of her blood. And I reckon she gave that up too. Once Era and Adonis both taken care of, it got easier for Belial, Moloch, and Baal. Killing was easy once they lost their cherry, and then orders came down from Catherine's place. No lie, that's why she was holed up out of state, so she couldn't get blamed for nothing. But Sister Urania and Sister Hannah, they never ran. They got packed out as a as favorites for something special that they called always part of Catherine's plan. It was freedom. They told us that church. They told us that church much. Us that much. Ay, ay, ay. All right, got less than an hour to finish this part of the book. Ah, was that the first time you heard a scent mentioned at the mine? Guess so. Is that the reason you finally ran? You and Bridget? Because you were afraid of your own lives and those of your children? Main reason I left was because she's stolen the baby. Catherine. Oh, yeah. Chrissy's baby was gone one day from the shack. We called the nursery. Brothers Moloch and Baal must have took the boy to Catherine. We heard them leave in the VW van early one morning. We Prissy snuck out like she always did to check on her little one in the nursery and saw he was gone. Moloch and Baal came back to the mine. Moloch and Baal came back to the mine late the next night without the baby. Never saw that child again until he was in them police photos. Little boy. The clean boy, the police called him. He was one of those kids they found in the mine at the end. I was shown photos by the police to identify the children they pulled out of there. What was Prissy's reaction to this? Prissy tried her to stay her grief, but she couldn't. We all tried to talk her around, told her all that trash again about the children belonging to the temple, not their parents. The seven who was still around got real nervous after they took the boy, though. More than more than when they killed Ariel and Adonis, or Urania and Hannah. It was like murder was one thing, but snatching babies was on a whole new level. Kind of scared, you ask me. Kind of crazy, you ask me. But then Prissy was gone too. No more than a week after her baby went missing. We were told she ran, told she was an apostate, that her name was never to be spoken again in paradise. Paradise. Ha. But they killed her, sure enough. So Catherine could keep her baby over in the big house in California. She couldn't have kids herself, but she made us girls have them and hated us for being able to. Did you hear members of the Seven admit to murdering Sister Priscilla? No, but they did her for sure. I know 'cause we were all sent out to work the fence without Prissy, who wouldn't speak or get up from the floor of the temple since they took her baby boy. When we came back in for lunch, Prissy was gone, and so was Brother Belial and Brother Moloch. Prissy's still out there, somewhere, buried in that desert. Cops never found her. Same as the others. They all dead and buried in the desert. Police never looked too hard for the bodies neither. What was the point once Belial was dead? There was no one left to put in the electric chair. You and Bridget took your babies with you when you ran, but what about the other children? There was 5 kids found at the end. 2 older kids that came over from France in 72. Sister Urania's girl and Sister Hannah's son. Other 2 boys belonged to Ria and Layla, who was shot dead trying to run on the night of ascent, and Prissy's little boy was the 12th child they pulled out of there. But when me and Bridget ran, them 5 kids was the only children still out there. Loads of kids had come and gone with their mothers since the beginning of the mine, but they all left with their mothers. Only kid who died there was the little one in 73 who didn't last a week. Was no doctors out there. His mother, Sister Elios, she died of a drug overdose in San Francisco in 77. She was living with Sister Gehenna and Bologna, who was 2 of the 7 that Catherine sent up to San Francisco to start a new branch in 74. After all she'd been through, Elios still went and lived with them wackos once it was all over and done with at the mine. Beats me why. Martha shook her head, then looked at Kyle and pointed her cigarette at him. But no way Catherine was taking my baby. What you want a baby for? She didn't even have like kids. Locked them away. Restricted access to them. So now we gotta just let her take 'em away from us at the mine like they was her own. No way. Not my boy. Or Bridget's. So we ran in the middle of the night, cut a hole in the fence just before we broke from working on the last stretch of wire that final day, and we took off. Made it to Mr. Aguilar's ranch, and he drove us into town. That man saved us. Belial knew it too. They was going to go and kill him anyway for helping Sister Prissy that first time she ran. There was a lot of fighting talk when they came back with Prissy in the van that day. Belial was bragging about how he would snuff that apostate wetback. It was no wonder Irvine Levine concentrated on criminal aspects of the cult strewn all the way from London to Arizona. Did he need anything else? A long silence followed Martha's disclosure about the children. Carla eventually broke it. His desire to know about the night of ascent was making him breathless. Martha, less than 3 months after you and Bridget escaped from the mine, the night of ascent was called by Sister Catherine, and 9 people were murdered at the mine in 1 hour, including Catherine. The police evidence suggests that 4 of the victims tried to escape from something, some kind of final ritual, a ritual that involved the willing execution of 4 members of the 7 and Catherine herself. Did you have any idea of this kind of mass suicide was coming? Or can you give us any clues as to what happened that night? She shook her head, sighed. Something was coming, sure enough. A whole lot of killing. We were all in a one-way ticket, like I said before. Making everything, like I said before, everything was leading to something that only Catherine knew about. That woman had plans she weren't wholly sharing, but what happened out there that night, I can't say. There was a lot of paranoia right through 75. Catherine lost that trial against Levine, and we were told that apostates were building a case against us with the police, the CIA, the FBI, the government. Everybody was out to get us. I believed it. Brother Moloch told us that if the government came for us before the night of ascent, we would fight to the last man to defend paradise. If we were too weak to fight, we were to kill each other, then ourselves. They never said what the night of ascent was, but me and Bridget didn't like the sound of it. You know, it just had that tone. I always reckoned the killings that night was because the 7 got spooked after me and Bridget ran, considering what we knew about the murders of Urania, Hannah, Prissy, and the boys. Catherine was crazy anyway by then, and all them drugs she'd been taking in California must have ratcheted up her paranoia to the next level when me and Bridget lit out. Police said the murders happened in some kind of leadership battle. That's trash. No one ever po- opposed Catherine beside Ariel and Adonis, and look where that got them. Other people said it was some kind of sacrifice to the devil. Martha shook her head. It weren't the devil. Don't you believe it? It's been said that Catherine claimed she was immortal, an elect, an eternal saint, that all those people she blessed could be too. But if she were immortal, do you ever wonder why she had herself killed? Martha shrugged, then drew further down inside her cardigan. She began playing with the cigarette lighter again. Lately, I've been considering other things, other possibilities. Right around the same time Max got in touch, which was kind of weird, because I could tell from his voice that he was spooked by something too. Not long after he called Bridget, Bridget gave up. Gave up? Martha looked at Kyle with her watery eyes and swallowed. She was frightened. You got to understand, there was some things we experienced that we saw that was just about as bad as knowing people were getting killed. Police always said it was the drugs that made us see stuff. Been telling myself my whole life after I ran from the temple that the police were right about that. That we were hallucinating. Now I know different, so did Bridget. We never. Where was I? We never got away. No, sir, not really. No one did. Whatever it was Catherine brought over from France came back. Nope. Francis came back. Oh, France came back. Brought over with her from France came back. Old friends. Belial was right. What he said in prison to the cops about them coming down. Being around us. I don't know. I don't think not one of us ever got free. Old friends, blood friends. I keep hearing these names. Were they part of the night of ascent? Martha nodded. She stared at her hands. That's what I've been thinking. Who were they? What are they? Is the question you should be asking. Another cigarette was sparked up. Her voice trembled with emotion. We've been calling we've been calling down what we okay. We've been calling down what we had become. That's the best way I can say it. For over a year, late in 74 and 75, we weren't the blessed. We was the opposite. We were cursed, like they is the friends. There was nothing holy or right about any of us. Not by that time. We'd all lost our way. Maybe some of us before we even got to that mine. But that was the point. We were ready to by the end. Crossed every line. We crossed every line, and all it was all broke down inside, in spirit, ready, ready for something, for them. All we had was the last days, and them was the last days in that summer. Only thing I had to get me to step off that crazy train was my boy. We were young and stupid, me and Bridget, but we were mothers. It's like we knew inside, knew we had to get out right then.